So, we are going to talk about end times awareness. We need to be aware um, of what's going on around us, and what's been going on the last 4 years plus is really pretty amazing. Um, we see a lot of things coming together. Convergence has been coming along for decades, and we've watched it shape up, but the last few years it's really accelerated. In Luke chapter 12, verse 51, Jesus gave some words of challenge to the religious leaders. Jesus said, "Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth? I tell you, nay, but rather division. For from henceforth there shall be 5 in one house divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. The father shall be divided against the son, and the son against the father, the mother against the daughter, and the daughter against the mother, the mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." And he said also to the people, "When you see a cloud rise out of the west, straightway ye say, There cometh a shower. And so it is. And when you see the south wind blow, ye say, There will be heat. And it cometh to pass. Ye hypocrites, ye can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it you do not discern this time? Yea, and when even of yourselves judge ye not what is right. Are we living in a time like that where people they can't say what's right and wrong? They can't say what a woman is, can't say what a man is. They think they're so smart. They can say and see all of these things, but they can't see the most elementary, obvious things. We're living in those times. Well, what did Jesus say in the Matthew 13 parables? He said, if you don't want to do right, no more of God, even what you have will be taken away. So what we're going to talk about tonight is not a thing that I want to talk about at all. But I don't write the script for the news that pops up. A little bit of heads up about some news that leads us into it. The Democratic Convention is going on. Tonight's the last night, I believe. Tomorrow night? Okay. The prayer rooms are segregated by sex, and an option for a gender-neutral prayer room. Here's a picture of it. So you get gender-neutral restrooms. We've had that for a long time, right? When we go into a place and Judy has to go to the bathroom, she won't use one, just on general principle. But now they have gender-neutral prayer. What? How is that even a thing? I guess you go back to the temple and they had the court of the women separated from the court of the men, but they didn't have one that was gender neutral. We're living in bizarre times. So, in thinking about being aware of what's going on around us, do you think you're a pretty observant person? I'd like to think that I am, but Judy says I'm not. If she tells me where something is, I still can't find it. So let me put it to you, kind of a mental test. Do you see what is different here? The creation, Genesis 1:14, and God said, Let there be the lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. All sounds perfectly fine, doesn't it? There is one thing that is not like the other things. Seasons, days, and years, those all fit together. Those are the same thing. But signs, and God says He's giving the stars as signs. If you're interested, perhaps one of these days we'll do a study of the gospel in the stars. If you'd be interested in that, we can go to it. God baked it right into telling us about the creation. And most people read right past it and they don't even notice. Not only for seasons and days and years, but the stars have been given as signs. Signs pointing to what? Well, I just point this to you as an illustration that you may miss some things that are right under your nose if you're not careful. If you're not observant, you won't see what's going on in the times that we live. So we have to talk about ancient Baal worship or Baal worship. They had not just a little, very extensive child sacrifice. Now that sounds real easy for us to say, but you know what that means? That means they killed a baby. A disgusting picture of what kind of perversion the Israelites came into the land of Canaan and discovered among the Philistines. The word Beelzebub, or spelled in the New Testament B-E-E, Zebub. Baal means Lord. Okay. Zebub means flies. He's Lord of the flies. When they had their Baal worship, they killed so many babies that in the days following, the flies became the personality. Now, I'm not trying to discuss you. That's what the Israelites came to. And you're going to begin to get an idea of why God said kill or drive out everything in the land. Because it would end up with fewer people being killed and far less being perverted spiritually. So just keep that in mind. Deuteronomy 18:9. We have here, God condemns this. When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. Among them is Baal worship. There shall not be found among you any one that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee. Now, the Canaanites, the Philistines, among the Canaanites, who worshipped Baal, were an incestuous people. Sexual molestation is a horrible crime in our society, and it should be. But in Canaanite society, their god, Baal, raped. Now, this is the myth of it, right? I mean, this is not real, as far as I know. The demon god named Baal, this is the myth that was built up that everybody believed about him. He raped his sister while she was in the form of a calf, and the text actually tells us 77, even 88 times. In other words, Baal raped her a lot. Baal also regularly had sex with his daughter, Pidre, and at his father's urging, Baal had sex with his mother, Asherah, to humiliate her. This is what the Canaanites celebrated. And I'm putting this to you for a reason, but I'm guessing that hardly anybody here tonight had any idea just how demonically sick that land was that Israel came and inherited. Baal worship also involved sex rituals. When they would gather around the image of Baal, they would sometimes have these sex rituals that was not consensual. Okay, do I need to explain what that means? It's rape. And they were doing it to replicate the myth about Baal's forced sex with his sister and mother that increased his power. And now you're going to see why I'm bringing this up. October the 7th. What were those awful things? Among them were killing babies in ways just like they did with Baal worship in ancient Canaan, just like it. And, of course, rape. And they even said they got whipped up into this frenzy, and they did the rape and the murders because it fed even more rapes and more murders. It fed into their power, just like Baal. So God put a restriction, we read about it, on blood magic. Now, blood magic simply is killing something, letting it bleed, so that that demon god would give you what you wanted. That kind of magic. And so magic in the old world was a really bad thing. We think of magic today as sleight of hand, and it is. But it comes from this background of the supernatural, spiritual, demonic world. So when the Israelites came into the land and began to put down Baal worship was actually on the move. And it went into Phoenicia. In fact, you study the Sea People, and it's really interesting what little we know, and you fill in the blanks with what we don't know. And these Sea People came down to Egypt and were so bad that Egypt chased them out. And they landed in Gaza, Philistia. They were so bad, and then some argue they came from Phoenicia, others say that they expanded too. So what's going on here is a spiritual war. And with what Israel did, putting down this perversion, Baal worship, Greece, when they saw what this perversion was about, they tried to stamp it out, and ultimately Rome finally did. Even Rome, with all their gods, their problem wasn't multiple gods. Their problem was the baby-killing, blood-letting that these people did. It was so bad that even the Greeks, and the Greeks, they were people that if they had a girl baby, they would just throw it out in the garbage heap and let it die. Okay, so they're not any kind of moral standard. But these people, the Gazans, if I could call them that, were so bad that even the Greeks were, I don't know what to call it, disgusted, appalled by it. And so in this war that was going on, you all know the history about Jezebel. She was a high priestess in this, and she married Ahab, and bringing in Baal worship to Israel. So you begin to see that it wasn't just a bad marriage, it was a spiritual warfare that was going on. Satan was bringing in this bloodletting of babies to Israel. And of course, we know the story about Elijah. You read that story and you think, well, wasn't there a better way? Did you have to kill all of them? Yeah. They all needed to die. And that was just the leaders. That was just the priests. I believe, the reason why I'm bringing this up, because it's in the news, that this battle is coming back and raging full on today. So Rome and Greece, as I said, were horrified at the child sacrifice. Example, when Rome came against Carthage, Carthage was all up into Baal worship. And when they knew that Rome was coming and there was no way for them to stand against Rome, these Baal worshipers took 400 babies, cut their throats, burned them in the fire, asking this demon god to protect them from Rome. Now, he didn't. And Rome sacked and absolutely flattened everything and destroyed them, probably because of their revulsion about what they were doing. 400 babies just for that reason. So, he's back. He's back. The DNC, as I'm sure you already know, it's in the news, the Planned Parenthood set up outside, and you could have a free abortion or a vasectomy done if you came to the DNC. Is there a connection? I think there's a huge connection. There's an obsession with the Democratic Party and killing babies. It's not just okay, it's an obsession.
It's as bad with them and abortion as it is with them and Trump.
It's an unnatural, bizarre.
That's the two things that are really wound up to. It's abortion and against Trump.
Yeah, and there's been some connections made. COVID-19, where did it come in? It came in Washington State and New York. Wasn't very long before that New York had lit up
Yeah.
in praise of abortion.
Yeah.
Accident? I don't think so. So Gaza is Philistia. That area is where the Philistines were. The cities of the Philistines are still there. Now, I'm not saying genetically they're the same people. I don't know anything about that. I have no idea. But I am saying that spirits are territorial. And so there's a connection to Moloch or Baal worshipers. Another item under our nose that we might not connect. And I'm sorry.
I've seen that.
I'm sorry we have to discuss this. This is what's going on in our society today. The figure that I'm remembering from the news was almost 500,000, if I'm remembering right. 500,000? Is that right? 500,000 is 500,000. Now, let's say 90% of these kids wound up in good homes and they're okay. Let's just say that. 10% of 500,000, are any of those going to wind up in child sex traffic or slavery? It's incomprehensible to me with the civilized mind. That's a big deal going on under the surface in America. I still can't really fully grasp this going on, but it is. So the Antichrist, I want to talk a bit about him because things are being set up for him. And he probably is alive. And I told you at the beginning of this over 4 years ago that while we see these things accelerating, it could still take another 10, 20 years for the system to fully shape. And so we're already almost 5 years into it, so I'm a prophet. Anyway, Chuck Missler, who's dead now, he's with the Lord. I learned so much from him. He was in information technology before he went into ministry. And he brought a wealth of this scientific approach to things in a good way. So he gives, in this short few minutes clip, just a few minutes, he goes through the names of this Antichrist that I thought you might like to hear. And we might study this more because I don't think I'm going to be able to finish this tonight.
He has 13 different titles in the New Testament and over 33 in the Old Testament. We just need to be sensitive to them in a broader sense. He's called the beast, of course, in several places in the book of Revelation. He's called the false prophet in Revelation 13. We'll be looking at that very specifically later. He's the father of the lie, Jesus calls him that, the father of the lie. Both Jesus and Paul share that. In fact, it's their comment on that will be the climax to our study Sunday morning, because that's really where we're headed. is not to unravel, but to realize there is a specific lie coming, and we need to be ready for it. Paul calls him the lawless one. It's one thing to break the law, it's quite another to have no laws. The lawless one is a terrifying term when you understand what that really means. He's called the man of sin, no surprise, but that's one of his labels, okay? The one who comes in his own name, Jesus gives him this label. I've come in my Father's name, you receive me not. Another will come in his own name, and him you will receive. What an indictment. Let's remember that. That's a very key piece of fact. He's called the Prince of Darkness, no surprise, called the Son of Perdition. He's called a star, and he's the unclean spirit, and so forth. And he's the vine of the earth in Revelation 14, strangely enough. The Old Testament gets more complex. He's the adversary in a number of verses. He is the Assyrian in a large number of verses. We'll look at that. One of the surprises for many Bible studies is to realize that he is called in the Old Testament the Assyrian. That's why we tend to attach so much importance to Nimrod, the first world dictator, who was an Assyrian. And we know there's another world dictator coming that the Bible calls the Assyrian. So is that ethnic? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. It's called Belial, of course, the bloody and deceitful man, the branch of the terrible ones, the chief prince, and the crooked serpent, the cruel one, destroyer of the Gentiles. He's the enemy. He's the evil man. He's the head over many countries in Psalm 110. He's the head of the northern army in one particular context. An interesting title he has, you want to remember, in Zechariah 11, he's called the idol shepherd. Not idol by Inglesi, idol like a falsely worshiped person. The idol shepherd. Because Zechariah 11 is the only physical description of this guy in the Bible. But it is a physical description of a guy. That in itself puts a lot of books to the... A lot of people say, well, he's not really a guy, he's a this or that. No, he is a guy. He's the king of the princes, and he's the king of Babylon in one context. He is the little horn. And we all remember the little horn in Daniel 7 and the little horn in Daniel 8. What we fail to call him that turns out to be useful is to realize he's the 11th horn, because there's 10 and then a little one rises up. And we'll discover that's relevant, and we'll get to that. He's the man of the earth. He's the merchant of the balances of deceit. He's the mighty man. He's a nail. He's the prince that shall come. A very key title of the Antichrist is in Daniel 9, verse 26, because that's the portion of the 70 weeks that we are in the middle of, and the prince that's relevant there is the prince that shall come. So who is that guy? He's also called the Prince of Tyre, the profane wicked of Israel, proud man, rod of God's. He's the seed of the serpent. That, of course, is the Genesis 3:15 label. And he's the son of the morning, the spoiler, the destroyer. He's a vile person, violent man. The wicked one specifically in a number of passages. The wicked one is a distinctive title. And, of course, he's the willful king of Daniel 11. So those are labels that should echo familiar to you if you've done serious prophetic studies. And most of you know the sequence of the empires. We all recognize that civilization seems to have its start in a place called the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia. And we have Egypt and Assyria as the first empires that show up in history. And that leads up to the Babylonian Empire. Now we're in about 600 BC and following Babylon. That gets succeeded by the Persian Empire. And the Persian Empire then gets succeeded by the Greek Empire. And we have to emphasize that because of our students that are from Greece, but we'll move on here. And we also have then the Greeks promote their language throughout the empire. And so Alexander comes along and really gets that organized. However, when he dies, the empire gets divided. And just as Daniel explains in advance, his four generals divide it all up. Cassandra and Lysimachus take the western end. Seleucus and Ptolemy divide the central regions. And the history between the two are so detailed in the Bible in advance that critics have said it had to be written later. What a compliment. It's that precise. And people talk about the so-called silent years. What do they mean by that? They mean between the Old and New Testament, there's some history that's not recorded in the Bible. Yes, it is. It's written in advance so precisely the critics can't handle it.
one of the things that I had forgotten, you remember the statue out of metal, 4 different metals, head of gold, legs of iron, the Roman Empire. Okay. I had forgotten that Rome split into 2 different divisions, if you will. And we all think of the northern Europe and so forth. That kind of fizzled out. But the southern one, or the eastern one, continued for another 1,000 years. And that is the enemies of Israel. We can look at that sometime. But that southern, across the top of Africa and east, those are the enemies of Israel today. And that was that. And my point is this. We all think about the revived Roman Empire, the northern or the west. Perhaps not. Perhaps it is the enemies of Israel from which the Antichrist will come. I don't think it's even perhaps anymore. I think that's where he's going to come from. So how can we recognize this spirit that is coming? And as we have talked about this, these things are birth pangs, the way Jesus talked about them. Matthew 24, those things are not for us. We're seeing them shape up to begin one of these days. The abomination of desolation, those are not for us, but we're seeing those things begin to shape up. And so one of the things about this Antichrist, and, anti has 2 meanings. Anti means against, but it also means in place of. And he's going to be both of these things. Denying the deity, first of all, of the Son of God. Denying his deity. 1 John 2:22, who is a liar, that he hath denied that Jesus is the Christ. So anywhere you recognize somebody who's saying Jesus wasn't the Christ, he's a liar in that spirit of the Antichrist. He is Antichrist that denieth the Father and the Son. Now that man is going to be the epitome of it, but the age shaping up to him taking over is going to be Antichrist. Is the church being replaced today?
Oh, absolutely.
England, Church of England, has now begun to remove and stop referring to the church, using other names for it. Now, why would they do that? Well, it's insulting to the Islamist. It's insulting to the secularist. It's insulting to the atheist.
Jesus Christ.
So they're trying to do it slowly. They're not just making a big pub. We're taking the name church out. They're just beginning to do it slowly because they're cowards. They know what a rebellion there would be if they did it too quickly. Secondly, denying the humanity. So first denying the deity, and then secondly denying the humanity of Jesus. Both of those things are heresies. If you take away the humanity or the deity of Christ, he was the God-man. 1 John 4:1. Beloved, believe not every spirit. And if you don't get anything else tonight, the whole reason why we're talking about this is because we're living in a spirit of error, a time of error.
Absolutely.
Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God. Because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Hereby know ye the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist. Whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is in the world. That's the only thing you've got that's the truth. 2 John 1:7. For many deceivers are entered into the world, who confess not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. So truth in a time of deception. We all know about George Orwell. He wrote 1985. not 1980. 1984. Got it wrong on both counts. But wow, what he wrote is so applicable to our time. He said, in a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Those of you who are in the public school system would say, amen. 2 Thessalonians 2:10 that we've looked at many times, and with all deceivableness, talking about the Antichrist, all deceivableness sounds like he's slick. Sounds like he's good at it.
Deceitful.
Deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause, because they love not the truth, this is today, folks.
Yeah, absolutely is. Absolutely.
And for this cause, God shall send them a strong delusion. Whatever you've got, if you're not intended to walk the path of righteousness, what you have will be taken from you. God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe a lie,
Boy, they're believing it.
that they might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Now, there are those who are advising pastors that we need to be very careful in navigating the election that's coming up. We need to be very careful not to hurt the feelings of any of the Democrats in our church. You remember what I said about Adrian Rogers and the deacon named Bert? Remember me talking about him? Bert, a deacon, came into his office on Monday and said, Pastor Rogers, why did you preach that sermon Sunday the way that you did? Adrian Rogers responded, Bert, I was shooting down in a hole. If you were down in that hole, you were in danger. My dad was a lifelong Democrat, Union, but things changed so much, but he could never bring himself. He would never say he was a conservative or Republican, though he voted that way sometimes. He could just, that was ingrained in those people when they grew up. Just like racism is in somebody who's above 70, 80 years old. That's just, I remember the day when I was racist. I was in the ministry and I still had such racist mentality. I didn't even know it. So we're living in a time of deception. I can only give you this advice, but this is very powerful. And some of you need to hear it because you need to be encouraged by this. By knowing the Word of God the way that you all do, many in our church, but not all, by knowing the Word of God the way that you do, you recognize truth immediately and falsehood immediately. Keep doing that. Keep doing that.
Reading your Bible.
Keep doing that. Don't give in to the pressure of the world. Stick with what the truth of the Word is, and you will immediately recognize what's false.
Absolutely.
And I believe that we're coming to a time when it may be a matter of our survival to be able to discern the truth.
I think you're 100% right.
Otherwise, you're going to have a tattoo on your forehead. 6. Well, no, I don't think we're going to have to worry about that. No, I don't think so either. Yeah, and that's another thing. I may have to edit this out. I may leave it in just out of spite. I have had so many people that I would never have believed would come out of the woodwork and say, the rapture's not a real Christian doctrine. If you believe in the rapture, you're a false teacher. That's what I've been called, because I teach the rapture. And even the best of them say the rapture happens just before the second coming at the end of Revelation. To which I say, so you don't believe in what the church has believed for 2,000 years. A fundamental belief of the Christian church is the imminent return of Jesus. You don't believe that. Well, yeah, yes, I do. No, you don't, because there's all that book of Revelation that has to happen before you say the rapture will happen. I don't know what to say to that. But even good people that were premillennial, pre-tribulational, They're now changing. The only thing I can come up with is, you remember, we've talked about it at length. Moses went up the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments and the law. He was gone a long time. And what did the believers down below do? They said, Aaron, he's not coming back. We want to worship something, make us a golden calf. And they did. You know what the golden calf was? That's Baal. Where would it have ended up? Would they have killed babies? Well, they never got a chance. When Moses came back, you know my favorite bumper sticker, Jesus is coming back, and boy, is he mad. That's a mirror of what happened when Moses came back. He was mad, and was rightfully so. So, a time of deception. I think they are weary of the tension and the stress of these last 4 years, and they've just given over. He's not coming back. We're going to go through the tribulation. So I say, we're looking for the bridegroom to come for the bride.
Absolutely.
Those folks are preparing for the Antichrist. I wouldn't even know how to prepare for the Antichrist.
I don't think there is any preparation.
I don't think so either. Not unless you want to give in.
Except